Welcome back to the Catholic Buzz, episode 21. We're so happy you're joining us, whether you're watching us here on YouTube or listening to us on Apple Podcasts. It's so nice to have you and continue the conversation, the Catholic conversation that we're starting here on the Catholic Buzz. My name is Father Daniele, and joining me always is Josh Sullivan. Josh,
hello.
Welcome to you.
Oh, thank you.
And also our Catholic expert over here, Matt Van Milligan. Matt, today is the first day of school.
First day of school.
What do you do with your children? Are your children being taught at home?
Yeah. We're starting homeschool and trying to balance that with work, which is a bit of a trick. Noah's starting grade 2 and Thaddeus is starting kindergarten.
The cutest kids.
Yeah, Samuel's not as cute, but
he's your ugly one.
Yeah.
I can't believe it's the first day of school. Well, it's a different school year. There's a staggered start this week. Some students are there today. Some are there tomorrow. Yeah. Some are starting Thursday.
I think teachers too, in general, are just a little bit confused. No one really knows what's going to be going on. I think we're all kind of flying by the seat of our pants.
Yeah.
But because of that, staggered starts, as well as children are supposed to be standing 6 feet apart while they enter into the school, and they each get asked questions sometimes, or they do the self-assessment at home, depending on the school board and depending on there's so many different things.
Yeah.
So this next 2 weeks is going to be critical and hard on parents. I think like parents just stick with it, and teachers stick with it.
Teachers, God bless them.
Right now they're going to be, and even bus drivers were just saying, I guess on the news, they were just saying we still don't have direction on what is supposed to happen.
Yeah.
How are we supposed to keep? They're supposed to run double the schedule. So because they have to have half the bus filled. So, but how do they keep? Do they keep siblings together? Do they, it's all just. There's no guidelines yet for a lot of this stuff.
This is vital that we keep our teachers and our parents and our students in our prayers
right
this
now
week, because I'm happy they're going back to school in many different ways, right? But it's going to be very challenging.
And for the secretaries and the custodians and for all those guys that have to deal with the teachers and the students and you know what I mean?
Yeah, custodians especially, who are a lot of pressure on them to keep it sanitized and clean, and
and the EAs, just everybody that's involved in that, and any administration for that matter.
Yeah, I can't wait to get back in the schools. I'm assuming they're going to let me in. I don't know.
If you have a mask.
If I have a mask.
Do you move your mask up with the collar? Can your collar move up a little bit and just have a big white strip with the?
I don't know. My gosh.
A racing stripe.
A little racing stripe.
Because in the documents released by the school boards, it says regular visitors who give students support.
That would be you.
Yeah, so I'm a regular visitor to school to give spiritual support. So
you imagine
how that
turns
happens.
out.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be a different year. 6 feet apart, wearing masks, and wait till flu season comes. Although I was having a conversation with someone in the parish, and they said flu season might not be as bad this year because everyone's keeping 6 feet apart.
You got the masks on, you're washing your hands all the time and all that
hands.
stuff. Australia just went through it, and they were saying in the news that Australia actually, they almost decimated the flu there because everybody's washing their hands, keeping 6 feet apart, doing all the proper precautions. The flu season hardly was a bad thing at all, hardly killed anybody, didn't get in, there wasn't the outbreak in nursing homes that would kill off a lot of people.
Right.
All that.
And that's because people were following.
That's right. For COVID, but it affects any kind of virus or.
And Australians probably appreciated that just because everything in Australia is trying to kill you. So just one less thing, right?
It's so true. One less thing.
Yeah.
But see what happens when everyone follows the guidelines and follows what is expected of you.
Yeah.
It
is going to be interesting to watch the COVID numbers, though. Once school begins, a month later, let's say, I'm going to say a month later to even 2 months later, what happens in Ontario, but also just in Canada, and as people are going to school, and as things become relaxed and normal.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Even myself, I've been in my office getting ready for school, and I noticed I don't have it on when I'm in my office, but as soon as I leave my office, I have to put a mask on. But there are times where the bathroom is right there. I get out and I forget to put my mask on, and as I'm going, I'm like, oh, well, if I get into the bathroom, it's just as quick as getting into my office again. And there have been times where if there's nobody in the school, it's late at night, I just go to the bathroom. But other times, if there's people in the school, then I turn around and go because I know that they could use the bathroom after me or whatever the case may be. But it is a big, like, it's something that, like, I just being there for 2 weeks, I've realized now, like, how relaxed I'm becoming. The first day I was there, I was making sure it was on, and I was like, hey, look, okay, I got my hand sanitized by my desk, you know what I mean? And I'm getting more and more lax as.
Yeah. And that's going to happen everywhere, even in our churches, we've opened our churches and, we're asking the questions at the door, making sure your mask is on, and people, as they're more comfortable coming into the church, they're just some people are just walking by those questions, and so you have to stop them. But it's good that you feel comfortable back at church again, but you gotta
answer the questions.
These are important for us to stay open, important for us to keep everyone safe.
Yeah, it's important to know the rules, that some rules are absolute and some are flexible. Yeah. If we can.
There it is. I was waiting for someone.
There are some
Matt,
rules.
you get the point today.
Yeah. I was going to congratulate us on having 2 kind of bathroom intros in a row.
In a row.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
Oh, we were talking about Noah last week. Yeah, exactly. So yes, today a really cool topic, which I think we should talk about more often than we do, and it's what Catholics have to believe, and not what Catholics believe, but what are we expected to believe in to be Catholic? Because you have all these sorts of teachings of the Catholic Church, and you hear
a lot of things that are contradictory to other things sometimes. Yeah. And you go, like, well, my grandparents said this, but then this priest is saying this. And how can they both coincide in the same Catholic universe, if you will? You know what I mean? Like,
right, and then you have certain people that really stress one over the other because that's their big sort of thing. So what is it that a Catholic has to believe in order to be in good standing, if you will, with the Church? And I think today's episode, we're talking about the difference between dogma, doctrine, and discipline.
The 3 Ds.
The 3 Ds. Things. And you could add devotion to that on the end.
I think that would fall almost under discipline as a subset, or would it be?
Exactly. So what we're talking about there is what is a dogma of the Church that we must believe in to be a Catholic? What are doctrines of the Church that we have to hold beyond a reasonable doubt? And what are disciplines or devotions of the Church that aren't necessarily life-altering for every Catholic?
So right there, I think we can kind of just kind of hit the nail, start it off with saying dogmas and disciplines.
Yes.
As a Catholic, these are things that the Church teaches that you must believe.
Dogmas and doctrines.
Dogma and doctrines.
Yeah, you said discipline.
Oh, did I say discipline? Okay, I didn't mean discipline. So dogma and doctrines, those are the things that are held fast that the Church teaches. This is what we have to believe. Disciplines are things that help us in our faith journey. It might be practices, it might be things such as fasting or kneeling maybe kneeling during the adoration, or not the adoration, even just during the rosary, or it might be only singing the Mass, chanting the Mass, or it might be, like, there's certain things in discipline that bring people closer to their faith, like bring people deeper in their faith, but aren't necessarily things that the Church says you have to. Church says it's good things, but you don't have to, right?
Yeah.
Does that make... Sum it up a little bit.
So how do you want to start? You want to start with dogmas and doctrines then?
What do you think, Matt?
Top down makes sense.
Top down. Yeah. So dogmas, in a simple way, are truths revealed by God.
By Christ?
By Christ. And they are to be held definitively by all Catholics.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So is that simple enough?
Yeah.
Do you want to go a little?
Yeah. So that's kind of the general definition, that dogmas are the teachings of the Church that are the most central, the most significant, and hold the most authoritative weight.
Yes.
So. And these are the core tenets of faith, that take the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed, that all of the proclamations in there are core aspects of your faith. And then throughout the history of the Church, there have been dogmatic proclamations of popes, of ecumenical councils that define things as dogmatic. But I think the list of things that are dogmatic are smaller than the list of things that are kind of doctrinal or disciplines or whatever. There are a few things because they're essentials. If you don't believe this, you're not actually.
So God has revealed those to be true.
God has revealed those to be true, yes. And if you do not believe them, or if you believe against them, you're actually in heresy. Yeah. That's what with a dogma. You have to, as a Catholic, believe them. or else you're a heretic.
You're on the inside.
Yeah, exactly. So, next question for people listening. What is a dogma then? Give us an example of a dogma. So right off the top of my head is the divinity of Christ.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Jesus is divine. Jesus is God. That's a dogma of the church. You cannot deny the divinity of Jesus.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right?
How we got there in the doctrine of that, how we got there is kind of a cool, like we knew that Jesus was Lord, but then the doctrine of Jesus is Lord, is God, was slowly defined. He's the Son of God. He's persons of God. And it's slowly, as we came into a fuller understanding, the church rounded out what exactly that dogma was. You know what I mean? Which is the same thing with doctrine. I think doctrine is something that is what the church, like what we have to believe, but it's not necessarily fully rounded, not fully defined. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So once a dogma is established, and sometimes, there is a process, like the process of arriving at the creed, that these are the core teachings of the church, or arriving
Jesus didn't give us the creed.
The Trinity. The Trinity is a good example to come back to your question. That once the church defines this, or once the church acknowledges this as dogma, it's pretty static. It doesn't have much modification or change. Right. Much development throughout the history of the church. And I'll probably get to it when we talk about doctrine a little more. Doctrine can develop in certain ways, but
and be a different understanding depending on how things were developed. Right?
Yeah.
So another example of a dogma of the faith. So dogmas that people have to hold to be true.
Yeah. The Trinity,
Trinity, the presence of Jesus
in the Eucharist,
is a dogma of the church. People have to assent, have to believe in that, which is funny because we talked a number of episodes back when we did an episode on the Eucharist about the number of Catholics who don't believe in the presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. This is a dogma of the church. It is to be definitively held by all the faithful.
And we talked about why. That's actually a perfect example of the dogma, I think, because Christ said it. It's in the Bible there. We have record that he said these words, and therefore Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist because Christ himself said these words. That's a dogma right there. Boom. God said it. It happens. This is it. There's no misunderstanding. There's no, well, could it be this? Could it be that? No, the words are taken at face value as is, where is, and this is what it means.
Exactly.
And that's dogma for you, I think, right?
Yeah. And the example you gave is the divinity of Christ. It's funny because the dogma developing in the early church, also the humanity of Christ.
Yes.
That there was a lot of
Yes.
there were tendencies towards kind of disagreements in either direction. One emphasizing the divinity, one emphasizing the humanity. When the church finally established the dogma, that it's both, and that these two natures miraculously and mysteriously coexist in Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Christ again said those words. My Father in heaven, I am the way, the truth, the life. I am. The way he talked, he said those words that he is God. Yeah. But he also said that he is human. You know what I mean? So
Son of Man and Son of God.
Exactly. Yeah. So but are coming to understanding that, and then when it was finally declared dogma, right? Dogmatic.
Yeah. So that is a dogma. Those are dogmas that there's no the church cannot change them. A pope cannot change them. And they are to be definitively held. Let's come back to the question of the Eucharist in a bit when we talk about disciplines and all that stuff. But so the next one is doctrines. So how are doctrines different from dogmas?
So again, kind of a lower authoritative weight, but it's sometimes hard to distinguish between the two because technically, all dogmas are doctrines, even though not all doctrines are doctrines are dogmas. Yeah.
Exactly.
But doctrines can develop over time, or the implementation of doctrines can be modified, but can't outright change. Can't be overturned. Can't be changed, but our understanding of them and the way that they're kind of spoken into new contexts, spoken into, like it's the same truth, but it's the way that we express it. Last week we talked about different types of Catholicism.
Yeah.
So there are core teachings of the church that are consistent across all of these churches, but the way they're communicated, or the way they're can be modified over time.
So would a doctrine? For doctrine, is the Immaculate Conception considered dogmatic?
It is dogmatic,
It is
but it
dogmatic.
was a dogmatic proclamation.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was so at one time it was only doctrine.
Yeah.
Would that make sense? And so they wrestled with
Yeah.
that within the church, and then became not. I mean, I guess it was always dogma, but
Yeah.
that's
That's
the
interesting.
question. So it was always dogma, but we would have proclaimed it dogma.
Yeah.
So it was something the church always believed, but it was proclaimed as dogmatic.
Yeah.
But in the doctrine sense, there was a wrestling about what Immaculate Conception meant. How do we define this? And so the Immaculate Conception came through more traditional sense, right? And then through like the miracle of Saint Bernadette and whatever. So that would be, I guess it is dogma, so it's not necessarily, but it was the way that a doctrine can be defined is through tradition, and then still be changed a little bit here and there, or the understanding or the practice of it would be. What's a good doctrine? I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head.
An example of a doctrine. So doctrines, very broadly, are the teachings of the church.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
And dogmas are the higher teaching of the church, or hold more weight, I think.
Yeah. So an example of doctrine that comes off the top of my head, I guess, would be that the priesthood is reserved for men.
Yeah.
That's
a doctrine of the church.
Yeah.
Following the example that Jesus had in choosing his apostles.
Yeah.
Right? So that would be one of doctrine. So again, let's be clear, doctrines cannot be changed either. Not even the Pope. No one has the authority to change doctrines. And we, again, even if they're doctrines of the church, Catholics are expected to assent to them, to believe them beyond a reasonable doubt. And we've brought up two kind of controversial ones. Not controversial, but with the Eucharist, when we're talking about the dogma, we're talking about a male priesthood in the doctrine. Those are ones that Catholics, even practicing Catholics who come on Sunday, have issues with, and so maybe we'll get into that.
Well, I think that's really good that you brought that up, though, because that's what every pope, it doesn't matter what the media says, but every pope, the last three popes, I'm going to say for sure, have referred to that priesthood is reserved for men is a doctrine. So that's not going to change. Now, how we understand that could potentially change, but men is like males, is defined as male. That doesn't change. You know what I mean? Like, so would it be then that married priest? Because that's where we get into the different, like the Roman Catholic Church. And I don't want to make the episode about married priests. That's a whole other episode. But would that?
Why did I have to use that example?
No, but that was a good one. I think that was a good one because it was like there are some things that can change and some things that can't change in that teaching itself.
So at the end, when you're talking about, so for example, John Paul II, back in the 90s, had a papal document, encyclical, I believe, talking about the male priesthood. And at the end of it, he says, and this is to be definitively held by all the faithful. Why? Not because he said so, but because it's a doctrine of the church.
Exactly.
So doctrines of the church are to be definitively held by all the faithful, which is really confusing today because a lot of people like to debate these things, Like the teachings of the church are like a political preference. Right? Like, with the election coming up in the U.S. and all of a sudden everyone has different opinions and all that stuff.
And you can pick this one and choose that.
Exactly. And that's not the case. With the Catholic faith, it's not like helping yourself to a buffet.
That was Dave Dunkley.
I'm looking at Dave beyond
he brought
the
that
camera.
Up. Yeah.
It's like a buffet Catholic. And Dave was saying, like, you take a little bit of this and you take a little of that. And then you skip over this and you take that. Like, it's not like that. You have to definitively hold the dogmas and doctrines of the faith to be a Catholic. And then what you're getting into, Josh, when you mentioned
discipline or
it's priestly celibacy, married clergy.
That's what I was thinking,
That's a discipline.
Yeah.
So now we're going from dogma to doctrine, which are definitively held.
Yeah.
Now we're going to discipline.
Yes.
And discipline are the practices of our faith. They can be changed.
Yes.
with some understanding and teaching and things. So priestly celibacy, for example, was a spiritual discipline from the 11th century.
Yeah, 11th or 12th, yeah.
Yeah. And that came into being for reasons there, has been held by the church since that time. That's 1,000 years of priestly celibacy. And I know that's a big thing that people talk about. And the people talking about it, not priests.
No.
Right? Like everyone says to me, oh, God, Father, don't you wish you could be married? No, like we knew what we were the call from God comes to us. We know what we were getting into. It wasn't like the day of our ordination. They were like, surprise, you can't get married.
Yeah.
You know? So when people talk to the actual people living celibacy,
you have 8 years of discernment, or 9 years, or even 10 years of discernment.
It's always people on the outside saying, God, I wish our priests could get married.
Yeah.
It's like, well, our life is directed to something different. Right?
That's a good episode. We should talk about that, because
we will.
Such a
Let's
good
do an
episode.
Yeah, because I'm getting all excited about it now.
No, it's good. It's good.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be talked about because people don't understand it.
We are.
And
Let's mark that down for an episode.
Yeah,
right?
and it's a really good. We were saying last week we had 2 weeks ago actually the perfect case study for the validity of sacraments was this priest in the States. That the difference between kind of priestly celibacy and what did we talk about as an example of?
He could choose to get out.
No, sorry. The I don't know why the word's escaping me. The example of doctrine that we gave, a priest. The priest must be male.
Yeah,
male
that's a good dividing line.
Yeah.
That it's you have different disciplines on priestly celibacy across churches that are rightly considered Catholic.
Right. Yes.
But to come back to examples of kind of doctrine, the Catechism is not only full of examples of doctrine, that at least the Catechism in the form that we have it now was designed to be a summary of Catholic doctrine.
Yeah.
So anything that's in the Catechism
is to be held by
is to be.
I think that's important. I've mentioned this before, but there was a priest I was watching online, and they held up, this is the Bible, and it's. Anyways, but they held up and said, okay, so can I believe whatever I want from the Catechism? Can I take some? Can I do the buffet thing?
Yeah.
Can I take some? Can I not? And he said, okay, so let's say we turn to, male priests. No, I believe that there's women priests. I love this.
Yeah.
I use it a lot. Okay, so male priests only. No, I don't believe that. I believe that there should be women priests too. I'm just going to rip that out. Well, then it becomes not the Catechism of the Catholic Church, but the Catechism according to Josh, which is not the Catholic Church, right? Not the teaching of the Catholic Church. And in doing so, I am not fully Catholic. I'm not, I'm in a sense living in heresy in some ways, right? But that's a big deal. Like, and if you have struggles with that, then you've got to take it to your priest and pray about it and ask God to help to change your heart or your discover why you have problems with it, right? Because I think there are legitimate Catholics out there that have problems with some of the things that the Catholic Church teaches, and if you didn't, I think, the gospel this week talked all about talked about Christ and wrestling with it. If you didn't have those problems, you wouldn't be living your faith out.
Right. Well, of course, we're going to wrestle with them, and some take a little longer for us to ascend too.
Exactly.
Right, and that's okay.
But
to just simply disregard
and not very explored
dogmas and doctrines of the church, that's not acceptable. No. Unfortunately, they must be sort of.
So wrestle with it. That's what my weekly challenge. I think that we should challenge people to is. Find that and then go wrestle with it. Means go search out the proper people to look for priests and everything else. Find out why the church teaches what it teaches. Because for me, every time I've had a problem with something that the church has taught, I go back to the 2,000 years of wisdom that it proclaims on my mere under 4 decades of living on this earth, you know what I mean? And normally the church overrules and has a lot of good reasoning behind why they believe what they believe versus my meager existence of a couple of decades, you know what I mean? So
with the practice of discipline that we were talking about, discipline comes devotion that we were talking about before, right? So let's be clear that if something doesn't fancy you, like let's say, for example, praying the Stations of the Cross.
Perfect example.
That's a devotion of the church, right? That doesn't mean that
you have to.
If you don't show up for the Stations of the Cross during Lent,
you're going to
that
hell.
doesn't mean that you're not a good practicing Catholic.
No.
Things like that. If you don't have holy water in your home, that doesn't mean you're not a good. So those are devotions.
Yeah.
Things like Lenten fasting, things like that. Those are disciplines, spiritual disciplines.
Yeah.
Like
wearing a scapular, or wearing a medal, or having a rosary in your car.
Exactly.
Saying the rosary every single day would be considered a discipline, would it not? Like, or saying the rosary, it would be a devotion, But it's still, great.
These are good,
very important,
but those don't define your Catholic faith.
Exactly.
Right? So that's where people are always confused. Like, what do I have to believe? What do I have to do to be a Catholic? Those are disciplines. So if we're continuing with that sort of order we've been, dogma at the top, doctrine there, then comes the world of discipline and devotion.
And where you have a little more picking and choosing. Like, you have to have, it's like going through the buffet, and you are given a plate of meat, potatoes, and whatever, but you can dress up the baked potato however you want to. Right? You know what I mean? Like, you can add more to it if you want to, but you can't take away from it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
I love food.
Somebody coming into the church as an adult, you have a lot of people coming at you like, this is Catholic, and just kind of presenting them as all being of the same kind of authoritative weight. Some of them are disciplines, some of them are doctrines, and it's actual work to kind of sift through them and actually get at what is a core Catholic teaching. And I think what you were saying at the very beginning, Father, is that like a lot of people are inclined to see these things through their own projects, to emphasize the things that they're most interested or most invested in as the very center of the Christian life. So I think it's important for us to kind of educate ourselves, be familiar with the Catechism, at least know how to navigate the Catechism. If you want to know if something is doctrine, knowing how to read an encyclical letter or an apostolic exhortation, because not everything that's in an encyclical is doctrinal. Exactly. But if it uses a specific formulation like the Church defines and declares, or this is to be definitively held, it is a doctrinal statement, and it does have the weight, the authoritative weight of the Church behind it. There are lots of aspects of these documents that the Church releases that are more in line with kind of discipline. You talk about the practice of tonsure, monks and clerics used to shave the top of their head as a symbol of humility, and
some of them didn't have to.
But it's a discipline. But it's a discipline that it's not as though like, that this priest didn't shave their head, so they're deliberately putting themselves outside the church. And being able to navigate between these things and clearly understand. What helps our evangelization, helps us to communicate the faith better, but it also helps us in living out our faith, understanding what some of the things we're invested in are disciplines, and we can encourage others to participate in our disciplines. But
I'm glad you mentioned that, because like sometimes people think like anything the Pope writes or says is
infallible.
Yeah. But that's not the case. He has to speak
very specific words.
But I think the way you said that was great. We have to learn how to navigate through the elements of our faith, right? Because it might be okay to say, I'm not interested in going with you to a Bible study, right? Or I'm not interested with praying the Divine Mercy Chaplet with you, Matt. But that's fine, because those are disciplines and devotions of the Church. But to argue with you about the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist, that's not fine for a Catholic to do. No. Those are dogmas of the Church that we have to definitively hold. And there are we have to know how to navigate through those different teachings of the Church.
And there are issues that are hot topic issues right now that we'll talk about on the show, I'm sure, at points, but sexuality and things like that are there is doctrinal statements out there on certain things and certain like remaining chaste, not celibate, but remaining chaste everyone's called to remain chaste in whether it be husband and wife. You remain chaste in your relationship, and how that can be done. Some of that is doctrinal, right? And as well as other things like that, but or abortion, or like there's hot topic issues like that, genocide, or even euthanasia right now. There are things that the church has come out, that not the church has come out with, church has always taught, but our doctrine, and so there isn't room for discussion or issues or that, but you should learn what those are so that you understand what it means to be Catholic and what it means to believe these things. And normally when I'm, like I said before, when you're researching that stuff, you understand why and the reasoning, and you can argue it a lot better, because it's changed my mind quite a few times. Going into the church says, okay, it's because of this, and this that we believe this. And I'm like, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. Okay.
Okay, we're just about out of time, but very quickly, and I don't want this to become a thing, but it usually does with us. But so we've talked dogmas revealed by God, definitively held. Doctrines come; they're broadly teachings of the church, right? They're definitively held by the faithful. Disciplines and devotions. Now, I'm a Catholic person. What do I have to? What is the bare minimum for me to do? People, because you take a census and you go around and everyone says they're Catholic. The Catholics say they're Catholic because they've been baptized Catholic, which they are. They're baptized Catholic. They're a Catholic. But what I think people don't understand is to be a fully to be Catholic in the fullness. Catholic in the
fully
fullness
Catholic.
Of the sense. Fully Catholic, I guess. You, have to be validly baptized, right? Like our episode a couple weeks ago. But to assent to the teachings of the church, the dogmas and the doctrines of the church, and to live a sacramental life. Right?
That means going to church on Sunday.
That means fulfilling your obligation.
Your obligation of going to church on Sunday, because right now that's still not an obligation, right? Those obligations have been lifted.
Right.
But going to church on Sundays, not on Christmas and Easter only.
That's right.
But going to church every Sunday. Is it reconciliation once a year? Mm-hmm. That's what
recommended at least
once a year. Yeah.
But, so lots of people say that they're Catholic, but aren't living up to those...
The specific
those minimum. I don't know if there's minimal standards, like that we can say, but because they're kind of big. I don't want to.
The holy days of obligation too, that are
the holy days of obligation
coming to. They're less in Canada than a lot of other places.
So for those people who say they're Catholic, because they're just baptized, there's no practice of the faith. They don't believe in the dogmas or doctrines of the church. What would you say? Would you say they're sacramentally Catholic?
I'd call them paper Catholics. They're Catholic on paper.
Yeah.
That's all, like, if you're not living out your faith, or you're not striving, or if you are, and you're not doing all the things you're supposed to do, but you're striving for it. But by striving, I mean moving forward, not using it as an excuse to not do anything.
True, because some people might be really trying their best, and so yes, sacramentally they're baptized Catholic. Hopefully, we're called to do much more. We're called to understand our faith, to live our faith, and to be in relationship with Christ. The dogmas, the doctrines of the church help to really flourish that faith within us. Mm-hmm. Right?
And you can use that. You can use your studying of the faith as part of your prayer time. You know what I mean? The ones like I play around with. Sometimes I do praise and worship because that's one of the things that touches me. And then like I during my prayer time do praise and worship, do a little Bible reading. But sometimes it's putting on a podcast and listening to what the church is like. A good podcast that's talking about what the church teaches. Specifically, have three guys in it. No, I'm kidding. but like a podcast that actually talks about that, or put on a book like an audio book that talks about this as well, or a talk, or a speaker that's speaking something about it. I use prayer time a lot of times, those times too, when I'm going in, and I have a half-hour drive now from my house to work. So I use those times as that formation time, because I'm just sitting there in the car anyways, and I could listen to music, and I love listening to music, but sometimes the formation comes better that way,
Well, thank you for this episode. I think your challenge before was good, to familiarize ourselves with the dogmas and doctrines of the church.
Especially the ones you have a hard time with.
And to open our hearts to really ask the Lord to help us to understand the ones we're having trouble with, and let God sort of work on those with us and let it permeate in our heart.
A lot of times it's something with us. The reason we have trouble with it is something either in our past, or like one of them was God our Father. I know somebody that had that struggle, and it was because they had a bad relationship with their father. And so things like that, like a lot of times, but their discovery was through a lot of prayer, and was that they discovered, oh, it's because of my relationship with the Father that I have a hard time calling God our Father, and this, that, not that that's necessarily dogma, or I mean it is, but you know what I mean. So like looking at that and looking at inside why you have a problem with that.
Yeah. So there's dogmas, doctrines, definitively held by the faithful.
You have to believe.
Disciplines.
Look it up in the Catechism. It's
devotions
there.
are different, right? Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Josh. If you have more questions about this episode or any other episodes that we've talked about, or you want to send more questions in for future episodes, email us at thecatholicbuzzpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much for joining us. For Josh and Matt, I'm Father Daniele, and I am definitively holding that this episode is now over. See you next week on The Catholic Buzz.